Hey guys, welcome to the Primed Fatherhood podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Condi, and this is episode 9. I love hearing my friends and family who are first responders talk about their jobs. It's noble and difficult work, and there's always so much urgency to the work that they do. My guest today is Cedar City Chief of Police, Darin Adams. He started his career as an EMT soon after high school and has worked through many different disciplines of the first responder world. Stay tuned as we discuss the many leadership lessons he has learned on his way to becoming chief of police. This is part 1 of a 2-part interview, and I know the audio isn't quite as good as normal, but the message definitely makes it worth it. We have answered the call. We are committed to a greater purpose. We are fathers. Past achievements do not guarantee future success. We will prime ourselves often to navigate each new challenge. We are capable, brave, and relentless. We will remain undaunted. All right, Darin, I'm really excited to have you on today. I've followed your career for a while since we're cousins, and I've always really looked up to the way that you've progressed through your career and just through everything that I hear about you and everything. So will you kind of take us through the progression of your career? Maybe start us with why you decided to be in the first responder area and then how that progressed.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Tyler, and thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate you bringing me on, and hopefully I can provide some information that's of value. So interestingly enough, when I was younger, I always wanted to drive an ambulance. I don't quite know where that came from, but I thought when I saw ambulances driving down the road that was something that was pretty remarkable, which I'm sure any young child would. I didn't know anything about what that entailed. And so, as I graduated high school and tried to determine what my career path might look like, at the time I was blessed to having been worked with my father as a land surveyor. I did that for quite a while in high school and out of high school, which I very much enjoyed, but it got old quickly, and a lot of those days were spent inside drafting maps. Now there's AutoCAD. Back then it was by hand, which I appreciated that opportunity. It improved my penmanship remarkably, but it was an inside job with the exception of going out into the field. And so in early 91, I enrolled in SUU, or Southern Utah University's EMT program, and went through that. And then quickly after that was hired by then Iron County Ambulance to run, and started doing that on call nights and weekends. And boy, was I on cloud 9. It was remarkable not only to be able to drive fast, although what I perceived as a young child didn't come to fruition then. You didn't drive all that fast all the time, and safety was paramount. But it was at that moment where I really gained a love for the first responder career field, but even more importantly, helping people, and gained great satisfaction from helping others in their time of need. And so I had the opportunity to do that for a number of years, all the way up until, so about 2000, I was still running on the ambulance, and I went to Paramedic School at that time. But backing up just a little bit prior to that, one thing that really seemed to dovetail nicely was the Iron County Search and Rescue and EMS. I decided to join that, again, wanting to put my EMT skills to good use. And that was great as well. We had several exciting adventures rescuing people. I got to use some of my EMT skills, EMS first responder skills in the field, which was just, I can't tell you how exciting that was in those moments to be in that and be able to make a positive influence in someone's life and perhaps their greatest time of need. And so one thing that the sheriff's office did back then with search and rescue, which I thought was odd at the time, was they used the search and rescue members for security. So they gave us a uniform shirt with a small, tiny tin badge. And we would often go to high school basketball games and football games before the days of school resource officers. And we would just be there, of course, unarmed, but just a presence to provide security. And after doing that for a few times, I thought, man, this is really cool. I think I like this part of search and rescue, which wasn't really search and rescue.
Uh-huh.
And so I talked to my wife, and I said, I think I want to, go through the police academy. Back then it was the what they call SFO, or Special Function Certification course, which is the first part of any police academy you go through, and that's about 5 weeks. If you do it full time, if you do it, part time, it can be up to 3 months. And so I said, I'm not going to do anything with it. I just want to be better trained to do what I do now. And one thing I didn't mention as part of that progression was in 1993, so about 3 years prior, actually 2 years prior to asking her permission to go through the police academy, I entered nursing school. So the EMS service was remarkable enough, and so I declared pre-med at SUU, and I thought, boy, medical school, that's a long time. And I wasn't really keen on spending that many years in school, and so I was turned on to the nursing program, applied a few different places, was finally accepted at Mojave Community College. They have several campuses throughout Arizona, and I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the campus in Colorado City, Arizona from 93 to 95, graduated in 95. And then it was soon after that, in January of 96, that I entered the police academy, doing that on nights and Saturdays, couple nights a week, and Saturday mornings while I was practicing nursing, and also still running on the ambulance part-time. And so once I went to the academy in early 96, I just thought, this is the greatest career ever. I was wide-eyed and just taking it all in. Graduated.
Academy?
Yeah, this was the police academy.
Okay.
That's right, sorry. And that was done part-time through Weber State University and a satellite academy in St. George. So we'd go down and do that. It was about July of 96 when I graduated, and I just had that zest for police work based on the camaraderie that was developed in that class, along with just the further desire to want to help other people. And so there was an opening with the Cedar City Police Department in September of 96. And again, begrudgingly, my wife allowed me to go test with really no expectation in mind or any hope. And they were hiring 2 officers. I tested. I got the news that, sorry, you were close, but you didn't make it. But the chief back then said, we've got this part-time, what they called a community service officer position. And that only required an officer to have gone through the SFO, or Special Functions certification, not the LEO, or Law Enforcement Officer certification, that follows. And it's much longer and more in depth. And so he said, it's part-time if you want it. And so at the time I was working for Iron County Home Health, seeing home health patients as a nurse, and still working on the ambulance. And me and my wife talked, and we thought, let's do it. So I was able to, in September of 96, early October, work for the police department as a community service officer in the mornings or afternoons, and then see my patients in the opposite part of the day, and still do ambulance. And so I did that from 96, and then in 97, so about 8 months later, July of 97, I was hired full-time by Cedar City Police, sent through the final block of the police academy, the LEO, or Law Enforcement Officer block, which is about 8, back then was about 8.5 weeks long. Graduated in September of 97 and began my field training with Cedar City Police Department. And then, as I mentioned before, because I was still running ambulance in 2000, the Iron County Ambulance Service agreed to send a few of us through Paramedic School down in St. George and pay for that. So I was trying to balance that out, which, obviously put some strain on my marriage. I was back then just such a go-getter and gung-ho, wanting to soak up as much as I could. And my wife, bless her heart, was just so gracious to allow that. And as I got older, which, we'll talk about later, I had to let some things go. It's just a natural thing, which was difficult. So I was working full-time as a new police officer, 3 years in, going to paramedic school at night after work, carpooling down and running shifts, here and there. And did that, for about the whole year of 2000 to 2001. Paramedic school was about a year long, doing it part-time like that. And so I did that and gained more experience as a paramedic, really enjoyed that. And if you think back to the puddle jumping, I call it, that I did, I really only spent about a year and a half as a full-time nurse right out of school, which seems so odd to me, but didn't want to let that go. And so I would pick up shifts in the emergency department. PRN is the Latin acronym they use, which means as needed. And then would work at Chad Anderson and Russ Olson, back then the podiatrist, their surgical center, on my days off from police work. Would go up there and work as a nurse. And so did that for until 2003, and this is where it got just a little bit much. And begrudgingly, I had to let the EMS go, and so I left Iron County Ambulance in 2003 after about 12 years of working in that field. And to maintain your paramedic certification is pretty daunting. Back then it was 100 hours and a recertification test, and just didn't have time to keep that. So sadly let that go, but still retained the knowledge. Wasn't doing search and rescue anymore. Had let that go years previously. And then, part of that was just getting busy with church callings and scouting and some of those things. And those obviously, took precedence. And so I tried to strike that balance as a husband and as a father in those early days. My oldest, Ashley, at the time was, at that point, she would have been about 12, 13 years old. Sadie was about 7 or 8, and crucial times to really be present there and to focus on fatherhood. And so fast forward, 2003, shortly before that, I was promoted to corporal. I spent a year and a half in the drug task force locally, the multi-jurisdictional drug task force. Got to work undercover and buy and sell drugs and try to take care of the element here in our fair city and throughout Iron, Beaver, and Garfield counties. And then in 2004, my task force time was cut short because new leadership had come in to take over. And since Cedar City Police had only put one agent in there, one of the existing sergeants was made the commander, which means I had to rotate out. And so I was promoted to sergeant when I came out of the task force, and then worked as a patrol sergeant from 2004 to 2006. And at that point was able to transfer upstairs into what was called the Neighborhood Preservation Division. It's now our Public Affairs Office, which was one of the highlights of my career, working with the DARE program, administering the Shop with the Cop program that we do every year, writing articles for the paper, and really the purely positive side of police work and PR, which was fantastic. And so I did that from 2006 to 2009, and in 2009 was blessed and fortunate enough to be promoted to lieutenant, and was the lieutenant in charge of the patrol division from 2009 until 2014, and then had the opportunity to rotate upstairs to the operations lieutenant position, which was a position that was in charge of internal affairs and oversaw investigations and animal control and more of the administrative side. And then in 2016, just 2 years later, I had the great opportunity to test and be interviewed for the position that I hold now, the chief of police, and was appointed on July 1st of 16, and just passed, my 4th year in this position this past July. Seems like I went fast, and in some moments it feels like it's gone that fast. Time really flies. It's amazing. People say, as the older you get, that snowball just picks up speed, and boy, is that ever true. And so it's been a wonderful, stressful, sometimes uncertain career, but I've been blessed. I don't know, without the family that I have, especially my wife, that I could ever have done this, because she has given so much and sacrificed so much to allow this. And I can only hope that the service I've been able to provide has been reciprocated back and blessed our lives likewise. So that's kind of the career path in a nutshell.
That's great. So I think there's a couple sides of that I want to talk about a little more in depth. The first is the ambition of it. Where did your ambition come from, and what made you want to try so many different things and keep pushing for new certifications and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple things. I've always been driven. My dad at an early age taught me to work hard. I still remember a time in my grandma's backyard, his mother's house, when we were cleaning up, and I wasn't doing a very good job. And he just quietly pulled me aside and he said, if you're not willing to do this job at 110%, then he says, there's really no reason to do it at all. And that stuck with me in that moment and has carried with me for so long. One of those things that our dads teach us, and they teach us a lot, and some things we forget, but that one stuck with me, and I've tried to embrace that moving forward. So in my mind, if I was going to do search and rescue, I had to be the best I could be. And then as I went to EMT school, I had to be the best. And the next logical step was paramedic, because, I needed to be 110%. And then through my career, with those different promotions and different rotations and transfers, that just stuck with me. It just felt like this is the normal progression in this type of career field. And so I just need to prepare myself and work to be able to do that and experience different things. First responders, there's a lot of strife, as you can imagine. There's a high level of substance abuse and divorce and marital discord within the career field, particularly law enforcement. And I don't know if I thought this at the time, but I just knew that changing often would be good. And I've been blessed to do that. Not everybody gets that opportunity to be able to move and change every few years, but I just feel like the Lord has blessed me, for that and for my desire to move on. So those are probably the biggest things, is that early teaching, the ambition, and just trying to reach that next pinnacle, hitting here and then knowing there's the next step, and I've just got to get there.
So part of what I've experienced and what I've seen is when you're trying to take yourself to the next level, there's usually obstacles and unseen fears and challenges that come with each of those. I'm assuming that it wasn't just all fun and games for you to just progress. What were some of the things that you had to overcome as you made these different steps forward?
Yeah, you're right. Those are, some people will say, why put yourself in that position? It's wrought with potential disappointment, and it is nerve-wracking. I mean, you're preparing to put yourself up against other people who are as equally qualified, and some may even be better. And so it's a tough decision when you get to a place where you feel comfortable and you've achieved where you think you need to be, and then that little voice whispers, hey, this is coming around the bend, you really should consider it. I think self-confidence was a big thing, because I, growing up, was shy and somewhat introverted and didn't have a lot of self-confidence, and this career really helped to change that and help me to come out of my shell and be a little bit more extroverted and enhance and increase my communication level and ability. So I'd say, the hesitancy, the self-confidence were some obstacles that I had to overcome. And, wondering, am I good enough for this? I think I know what this next step entails, but I haven't been there. So how do I really know? And am I going to be satisfied when I get there? There's some of those unknown things, that you just don't know because you've never been there yet. So those are probably the biggest challenges and obstacles that I faced. And then again, as I would consult with my wife on these things, she would often roll her eyes like, oh, here we go again. And so that was sometimes a little bit tough, and in the end she would concede. And I don't know if every time she truly, supported that, but she always told me she did. And so there were those hesitations and fears. Well, is this going to have an impact on the family if I get selected or get moved further in this position or to a different position?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as the progression of your career goes, I'm sure that a lot of that progression wouldn't have been made without some leadership skills. What are some leadership lessons or skills that you've learned along the way that you feel like have helped you throughout your career?
That's a great question. Just when I think that I've got a lot of those down, I realize I'm not there. I have these weaknesses, and I'm always striving. I just had a conference, an international police chiefs conference that was all virtual that we listened to, and there's an author by the name of Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
Mm-hmm. Start with why.
There you go. So I'm reading that right now, and probably should have read it long ago. I'm almost 24 years into this career, and I'm learning things now that I wish I would have applied back then. And so I was blessed at an early age to have a father who taught me hard work and dedication and sacrifice and stick-to-itiveness and just doing the right thing because it was the right thing to do and working hard and never giving up. Not that I was, perfect at that by any means. And then, being involved as a young boy and even as a young adult within the LDS Church, and more specifically scouting, taught me a great deal about leadership. And I think the one thing that hopefully I had going for me and the character and the values that I stuck to the most were unconditional love and positivity. I would always get accused back in the day of, you're always happy and always smiling, you never seem down. Well, it just felt like there was really no reason to do that. And there were times, we get angry from time to time. We have bad days. But the advice I tried to take then, which I give out to my guys today, is, really focus on yourself and what you're able to accomplish. Don't worry so much about the people around you. And especially within an organization, don't worry and stress about the things you cannot control because you'll drive yourself crazy. Focus on what you can control and let the chips fall where they may. And so those were important leadership skills to have early on. Leading by example, humility, a positive attitude. I think a positive attitude conquers all. And some people say, well, that's just a cliche. Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Even in our darkest days, things can always be worse. And then just trying to be compassionate. I think that's a leadership skill that often is overlooked, and it's taken me a long time to not that I've mastered it, but to really, sand the rough edges off of that. And that's one thing I try to do with younger officers as a new supervisor is just check in and ask, how are you? And what can we do for you? And I'm thinking about you, and to show that human side, and then to admit fault. That was one thing that really I struggled to do. If I made a mistake, I didn't want to admit that. I didn't want to show weakness because then I felt like, well, I'm no good here. And I learned early on, and it took me several years to understand that that's important. It's important in any type of business or organization or scout troop or whatever. that people see that you're human, and that if you make a mistake, you can say, I'm sorry. And I think that endears people more to you, and you pick yourself up and you move forward, and hopefully learn from that.
Yeah, that's a big one, I think, for me. And it is always one of the scariest parts of being a leader, is when you have to really own up to something and admit it. And you always feel like there's a big negative consequence of letting it show. I'm curious if you ever actually felt any negative repercussions from admitting fault.
No, I honestly can't think of any. Just a quick example. I remember responding to a domestic assault as a officer with about 8 or 9 or 10 years on, and we got there and we heard the screaming and we went inside, and this spouse was attacking the female viciously, and I thought, he's going to kill her. And we went in and we started to fight, and we were wrestling on the bed, and I got so mad that I yelled something to him that was I used a curse word. I used a racial slur to him in that moment, and thought, you're gonna know who the boss is. Well, that just escalated him even further. It did no good whatsoever, and I felt horrible after that. But I didn't want to admit it, right? I'm the police officer, I'm the authority, and I'm not going to tell you I'm wrong, because that could have negative consequences. And I stewed on that for a moment as we were processing the scene, and I walked outside, and I had to swallow my pride, and I went up and I said, hey, I am so sorry for what I said. That was totally inappropriate, and I was wrong. And the response I got back really warmed my heart. He said, no, I shouldn't have done that. I understand, no problem, no big deal. And it was kind of like a confession, really. It lifted that burden for me, but it also, I think, in that moment, hopefully created a relationship where this person, saw me as an authority, but, also saw that I could, tell him that I was wrong and that I could apologize. And I think some of our best officers do that. They tell people, they treat them like human beings, understanding they're having a bad moment, or it could be one of the most challenging times of their life, but they're treating them like a human being, and they're being compassionate. And sometimes they have to apologize for the things they've done, and it just solidifies. And those relationships go on to where it pays dividends when that person has an episode again, and that officer goes out, and it can make the difference between a potentially lethal interaction or a completely benign one, because of those relationships. And they all begin with compassion and humility.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. I think that's something that's not natural for us men to recognize. We feel like if we're showing compassion or empathy, that we're showing weakness. But I think it's awesome to hear that, if you're willing to apologize and admit fault to someone who's on the other side of the law, and show empathy and compassion there, that it's not that you're necessarily condoning what they're doing, but that you're recognizing that they're a human, and that they deserve respect anyways, even if they are doing something that's not legal or that's harmful to someone.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I wish there was a class in high school that would teach us all that early on. It would set us up for much greater success.
Yeah, I find that there's a lot of skills like that we don't get in school. We get kind of the bare minimum of the general knowledge that's easy to teach, and then from there we're just kind of put out into the world and have to deal with what comes our way.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
There's another side to that I think is worth discussing, and that's how to cope with huge amounts of stress and strain. As an officer and as an EMT, I'm sure that you've been put through the ringer over and over in these really high stress situations. What are some of the things that you do to stay in control?
Yeah, that's also a great question and so important. So I did encounter a lot of traumatic events, both as an EMT paramedic and certainly throughout my career as a law enforcement officer. And, usually after a traumatic event, we would try to engage in a critical incident stress debriefing, which was a facilitator with mental health background and maybe a facilitator from the first responder side, so that there's some, you can relate and it's not a stranger there. And so those were important after a traumatic event, to be able to process and talk those things out and listen to everyone else who had a hand in that. And more than anything, feel like, okay, hopefully I did everything right. I didn't mess up and none of this was my fault. I think therapists are highly underrated. I think every one of us could use a therapist in our life. I have not done that. And often people say, well, why? I started a couple of years ago mandating that my staff go through, and we did it 1 year, then we took a year break. We did it again last year. And some people like it, some people don't. They don't want to be forced. But I just told them, we're going to bring her in. It's 30 minutes. You can sit there and fold your arms and not say a thing for 30 minutes. You can say, I'm fine, and walk out after 10 seconds. I'll still pay you overtime. But it gives you the opportunity, if you're not quite willing to go see them on your own because of whatever reason, fear, embarrassment, and then you can blame it on me and say, well, the chief said I had to go, so I didn't want to. So I've done that a couple times, and I've felt that there's been value. But interestingly enough, over 30 years of the first responder business, I just don't feel like I've needed that as much. And I honestly attribute that largely to my faith. As you know, we're both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my faith is extremely strong. My testimony is incredibly strong. And I just did a lot of praying and talking to my Heavenly Father. And that really gave me what I needed to get through a lot of those things. And I felt like there was, a lot of times that spirit that would comfort and let me know things were okay. And I'm sure I would have gotten value from therapy. And again, many of my staff have done that, and I try to encourage that. And I have no problem doing that myself. I just have not needed that yet. And so those are some of the things that I think made a big difference going through that. And of course, like anything else, especially in this business, even if it's not a formal stress debriefing, to talk that out. We talk with one another about how we did and how we can do better, and just that camaraderie and that mutual support makes a big difference and does help a person process, through a lot of those things. And then you and most therapists will tell you that you've got to process it, you've got to pick that apart, make sure you've evaluated everything, and then let that go, move on, and don't revisit that. And there's going to be memories and times you do that, but to not dwell on that and not let it affect your life going forward is paramount.
That's great. I think that's, I think it's important for people to not ignore the spiritual side of their lives. It's as much a health thing as it is mental health or physical health. You have to have a belief system and strengthen that. And ours is in Jesus Christ, but I think that it's valuable for people to just hold on to something and really dig in and lean into it, not ignore that part of themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was probably, as I try to analyze why I've knelt or leaned more on that than maybe traditional therapy, is because I made a vow early on in my career that I would let, my Savior and my Father in heaven guide my path. And so before any major decision, I would pray, and if it was the right thing, then it was, and if it wasn't, then I would accept that. And so I felt like if they're guiding that and guiding me, then I can go to them, when I need to work things out, and I'll have what I need.
Awesome. So for this last question for this segment, I just want to ask what advice you would give to guys who are coming into a new leadership position and how they should approach that?
That's a great question. And I can tell you by example, I've made a lot of mistakes this way, so I can tell you what not to do. Communication is going to be key. When you're talking about leadership, no matter if it's 1 or 2 people that you're leading, or it's 50 to 60, it's all the same. And I think they have to differentiate between management and leadership, because those are 2 entirely different things. But you've got to have both, depending on your position. And so I think it's important to communicate with those that you lead and have intimate conversations to find out who they are and what motivates them, what do they fear, what concerns them at home, so you can really try to lead them. And sometimes that means motivating them to be productive no matter what they're doing. When things are not so good at home, that affects the work. And so they've got to know that they can come to you at any time and be able to be open and honest and transparent and say, I'm struggling and I don't know if I can do this today, or I feel like I'm slipping. Just that symbiotic relationship of back and forth communication, I think, is where you start. And then those things I mentioned earlier, being able to be humble, being able to admit weaknesses, being sensitive, showing compassion, and then being able to reach out and seek advice. The leader isn't always the expert in everything. And one thing that I immediately started back when I became the chief was to have a policy review group of officers of varying ranks. Some are just officers, some are supervisors. And I do that to this day, where I'll send out policies for them to review first and have them tell me, what do you think? This looks good on paper, but how's it going to work in the field? And what am I missing? And then I get the feedback, and then we tweak it. And then it does 2 things. Once it goes out, it's had their buy-in and their input, so now they're invested. But then it also gives me a little bit more comfort, because I know that they've signed off on it, and we're not going to have any issues with them following that, because they've helped create that. And so I think that's important, to be able to, do that with those you lead. Not just say, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to be, so go do it. It's like we talked about earlier, it's starting with why. And that is so critical now, more perhaps than it's ever been, is to tell people, this is why we're doing this. This is the reason. Now, they may not agree or like the reason, but I think it's important that you tell them, this is why we're doing this. This is why I've made this decision. And as much as you can involve them in that decision-making process, I think is important. And then finally is just positive reinforcement. You've got to let people know, that they're doing a good job, no matter what it looks like. And whether that's awards or employees of the month or you name it, it could just be a pat on the back or an email saying, keep up the great work. It's a tough job. It's a tough job as a leader to constantly be navigating, those you lead and supervise, and making sure that they're achieving their full potential, that you're trying to help develop them to get where they want to go, and that you're keeping that carrot out in front of them, and then the reward on the other side.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. And I think that it's important for us to just be reminded that, the humility, the empathy, leading by example, and being willing to do whatever job you're asking someone else to do, those are all incredibly important, like you mentioned earlier. So I appreciate your time talking on leadership, and I'm excited to talk more about family and all that.
Perfect. Thanks, Tyler. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Darin, for taking the time to share these lessons with us. Thank you to all of you who listened. And as always, if you got something out of this podcast episode, please share it around. Please subscribe to Primed Fatherhood and leave us a review wherever you're listening. Thanks again, and stay primed.